So our first speaker is Andrew Pass. Andrew is responsible for looking out for the space that many of us don't look out for, and it's often referred to as public space.
Thank you very much. Feel free to... Free beer, you can't beat that. Okay, Robert Pirsig in his great book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, says, if you want to tell a tale, start with the bricks. And tonight what I'd like to do is start with a few bricks that are near and dear to my heart. The bricks of public space in the city, the urban fabric. I want to tell you a little bit about some of the spaces that are important to me and to the group that I work with, the Vancouver Public Space Network. You know, prevailing theory has it that public space is just meant to be moved through. If you think of the language of engineering, it's all about arteries. But in fact, public space is meant for all sorts of things. Moving through, sitting, gathering, meeting, hanging out with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Space is an intricate network. It's meant for all sorts of things. And one of the conventional questions, one of the first and most important questions that ought to be asked in urban design and city planning and regulatory activity is also one of the most overlooked, and that is the right to the city. How can we reflect this in city building? How can we make sure that everyone is included in the planning process? Well, I'd like to advocate that we sit down for a second. You know, there's a lot of benches that have been pulled out of the city in the last few years. They've been replaced with those things that have really small little bumps on them that prevent you from laying down and relaxing. But it's a good opportunity for us to take a second to sit back, to meditate, to reflect on what it is that makes good public places and good urban design. For me, we start with kids, and we start with folks of all ages. Public space has to be space for everyone. Young, old, kids, seniors. You know, Vancouver has lost a lot of kids in the last 30 years because we're not building places that are conducive for them. The number of kids per population in this era has totally dropped down. What about color? A city of color should be a requirement. We need more spaces for spontaneous art. We need signs like the one in the top corner there that says, artists welcome, go to it. Spontaneity rules the day. Art, when it becomes too regulated, begins to ossify. It no longer reflects the zeitgeist. And what about a green city? You know, we opened a community garden about 3 weeks ago at Burrard and Davie, and within about 3 days we had 200 applications to use it. There is way, way, way too much need and way too little space for community gardens in the city. And yet they give people a chance to connect with the city, to connect with their neighbors, and to build social capital. These are all very important things. And what about protest? You know, a few years ago at the Brandenburg Gates, they were gathering for other reasons. But when I was there a few years ago on a sunny August afternoon, they were gathering to protest Michael Jackson's latest media slandering. It might not have been as virtuous a gathering as tearing down the wall, but it was important nonetheless. We need spaces for that. You know, Vancouver lacks a little bit in that respect. We have the art gallery, which amounts to about 25 steps really for public gathering. And it's one of the reasons that the organization that I work with launched a contest recently called Where's the Square? If anyone has a good sense for design and urban planning, we encourage you to enter it. We're looking for a big grand gathering place in Vancouver. And of course that means fun too, because when people gather they have fun. If design's not your thing, maybe you'd like to join us the next time we do a takeover of the C-Bus. Earlier this year we loaded 400 people into it and dressed them up as pirates. We rolled in 2 bands and we took it over. TransLink was a little unsuspecting at the time, but they got used to it. You know, research has suggested that bulls don't like to be stared at by CCTV all day long. We're of the opinion, in fact, that people don't either. And despite the fact that there's a big push for them to help monitor public space, the truth is that they actually don't do what their proponents say they do. So we need safe spaces, but we don't need CCTV surveilled spaces. We also need what some people are calling opportunities for a read-write city. It's a bit of a riff off the Creative Commons notion. But there should be spaces in the city for people to put up their poems, to put up their ideas, their garage sale notices, their political tracts, if you will. All sorts of stuff. And yet right now, we have 200 poster cylinders in the city, and that's the designated space. Think about what's going to happen if Moses goes astray and turns up and there's no poster cylinder nearby to let people know the good news. This is important stuff. It's a lot more important than Jimmy Patterson's billboards, I would grant you. And you know, we need to be careful about what we let being written in this city. Sometimes just opening it up isn't a good idea. You know, I'm not against corporations, but the corporatization of the city is something that does cause us a lot of concern, particularly when you have such few and delicate public places. You don't really need to load Hummers into them. We'd also like to advocate for a city that knows where it's going. Think of all the folks that come to Vancouver. This is a wayfinding map that was put on a utility box in Victoria. I don't know how many times I've given people directions in the city of Vancouver, but it seems to me that's a lot cheaper than a downtown ambassador. A lot more effective, perhaps, too. We also need regulatory apparatus that doesn't encourage people to chase after dogs with fry pans and spatulas. Public space is indeed regulated space, but we've got to do it properly, and come on. Iron Chef would not approve of that. Well, what else can we say? It's all about scale in the end. Cities fall naturally into a scale that works for them. The height of buildings, the width of the roads, the spaces in between. It's all very important at the end of the day to create that sweet spot, that sense of balance between the spaces between the buildings themselves and the people that use them. And of course, cities change. One of the things that's very important to keep in mind at the end of the day when people say, we can't have this, it costs too much money. A public square, that's ridiculous. How are we ever going to build it? The city is a bricks and mortar entity when you look at its physical self, and it changes. It changes over time. We, of course, all know what's happening at the Woodwards corner right now. We also need to think about the process through which we design these places. Transparency at City Hall has been ringing through the newspapers in the last couple of weeks, but really it's a lot more than just an issue about $100 million. It's about process writ large. We need to make sure that when it comes to city design processes, people can be engaged in dialogue that's meaningful, that gets them into the action early in the game. Because, of course, we do want to pay attention to those bricks, because we want to make sure that the layers and layers of city that exist allow for new things to creep up through the cracks. Thank you very much.